Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about out-of-home advertising or outdoor advertising. I'll go through some of the different types and categories and subcategories of out-of-home. Also, we'll go through some creative tips from a copywriting and art direction standpoint and some of the things you want to consider in terms of how you integrate outdoor advertising into a broader multimedia or integrated kind of campaign. An out-of-home ad will be one of the required ads in your integrated campaign that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So that's part of why I want to talk about it here so that you can already be thinking of this as one of the media that you've got to figure out how you integrate it with your overall campaign concept. On Thursday, we're also going to be doing a lab dealing with billboard advertising, where you're going to create a billboard, and I'll show you how to put that into a mock-up, because that's one of the tools that I'd like for you to be able to have, is a little bit more in terms of how to use mock-ups. So out-of-home advertising, while we think of it as billboard advertising and poster advertising as kind of the default, it does include a lot of different subcategories. Transit advertising, so on taxi cabs, buses, in airlines, airport terminals, and things like that. So there are a lot of different parts of it, grocery carts even. The kiosks, do you remember those? Kiosk advertising was really popular for just a few years right before the smartphones made kiosks pretty much obsolete. You still see a few kiosks, but the idea of the kiosk was these would be placed in pedestrian-heavy shopping areas, and you could come up to a touch screen and interact with this kiosk to find out where different kinds of businesses and things were. So obviously the Google Maps has pretty much eliminated the need for this kind of advertising, but it does help illustrate the idea that out-of-home advertising is often called directional advertising, because it reaches people when they are outside the home, when they're out and about, and they are likely to be spending money while they're out moving around, particularly on impulse purchases. Major types of out-of-home. If you look at this and think about what's going on currently with the coronavirus, my guess is that out-of-home advertising is probably the area of advertising that's going to be most impacted by the stay-at-home orders, by the economic downturn and things like that. Because you look at all this, the billboards and posters, there's much less traffic out. There's much less desire for advertisers to be placing those kind of messages out there, and the rates for those need to be tied to traffic counts, that in terms of how many people are going to be seeing the ads. And obviously that's going to be a lot less when most people are staying at home. But in-store point of purchase, that's also down. Sports stadium advertising, that has probably dried up for the year. This pie chart that I'm showing you is kind of typical data from 2018 in terms of the percent of expenditures for out-of-home advertising and what makes up this whole share of out-of-home advertising, the whole advertising budget. Transit advertising going to be going lower, bus shelters, all of these are going to be probably tremendously negatively impacted by the coronavirus this year. And while we think of out-of-home advertising as generally being 2D static ads, there's actually a long history of out-of-home advertising being moving, being animated with real people. So this goes back to the dates of the town crier back in the colonial periods, where the town crier would be standing on the corner and giving the news of the day, and in addition telling people what kinds of things were available in the markets for sale and things of that nature. This image is of what's called a sandwich board advertisement, and you can see why it gets the name. Somebody's just walking around with a board on their front and their back, and they're kind of a walking billboard. Kind of a current version of that would be here with the doner kebab in a costume going out and giving out free samples. The general strong points for out-of-home advertising, it's always there. So no matter what time of the day or what day, if you are out and about, that ad is going to be visible to you. So they always, the out-of-home industry always talks about its advertising 24/7, 365. Reach and frequency tend to be very high on both components of those. for out-of-home advertising, and that's simple. So if you buy a 100 GRP, which would be considered a full showing in a particular market, the average reach for that is about one per person per month. And that's simply a function of the fact that we tend to travel the same routes over and over and over. So if you buy a 100 GRP where you're guaranteed or statistically you're going to get everybody in that market, they're going to see that same ad over and over and over again. So this is one of the reasons why we talk about out-of-home advertising being something that needs to be, from a creative standpoint, something that will not wear out quickly. Often humor is a very good approach to that because humorous ads don't tend to wear out as fast as, say, serious informational ads do. Okay. Demographic flexibility, that is getting better as there's more targeted data available. In fact, a lot of what the out-of-home industry is doing now is using geo-marking and data from your traveling habits that they are able to glean to figure out where people are going and then trace that back to homes, and that's not at all scary, is it? So there is a lot better geographic targeting than they're used to, but in general, for most out-of-home advertising, especially things that are going to be highway billboards, you have to figure that anybody could be exposed to that message. Disadvantages of out-of-home. While anybody could be exposed to the message, their exposure is generally very brief, just a couple of seconds. Think about when you're out driving around, you're obviously scanning the environment. The billboards that you see, you are probably only going to attend to them for a couple of seconds. So we have to be able to write messages that can work in that time frame. They can't be complex. They can't be a lot of information. There's no chance for rehearsal and things of that nature. Context effects. I think I talked about context effects earlier in the semester, but this is the idea where the surrounding environment can influence your attitude about the advertising. And so negative context effects can certainly come into play with out-of-home advertising if it is not precisely targeted. For instance, if the out-of-home ad is for a luxury car and that's placed in a very rough, low-income kind of area, that kind of juxtaposition can create a negative context effect and negative attitude on the part of the consumer. Validity of the audience measurement has always been an issue with outdoor advertising. This isn't a media planning class, so I'm not going to really get into that factor, but just be aware that a lot of times the audience numbers for out-of-home need to be kind of taken with a grain of salt. Low availability is also an issue, and that sometimes contributes to the negative context effects because you don't always have the opportunity to place the ad exactly where you want it to be. Communities and cities are often quite restrictive of how much outdoor advertising they will allow, how many new billboards they allow to go up. And so a lot of times you have to reserve outdoor advertising months and months and months in advance. And so it doesn't necessarily work for real timely announcements, for things that you have to get up quickly. There's just a very limited inventory of outdoor ads that are available. Poor audience attitudes. There's a lot of outdoor advertising that maybe isn't very good, that some people find offensive, and you don't have the opportunity to unsee an offensive outdoor ad, and you think about people are driving around with their children and things like that. You can see why people sometimes have a fairly poor attitude about outdoor advertising. And then there's the clutter, right? Because this is what a lot of places look like in terms of this is Beirut, and it's the Beirut, Lebanon, and this is the highway that goes from the airport into downtown, and it's a gorgeous view of the Mediterranean Sea. And then as you look up into the city, instead of seeing all the beautiful buildings and everything, basically you're seeing a collection of signs. That kind of thing happens a lot. This is a street in Houston, and you see a lot of signage, and that's just that. All of that kind of contributes to negative attitudes that people have about outdoor advertising. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the special effects that you sometimes see used in outdoor advertising. First two special effects are extensions and sequences. Extensions are when you have a billboard and part of the ad breaks outside of that rectangular width by height dimension. So in this case, this is a pretty good example because the extension there helps emphasize the size of the T-Rex there. So that's what's called an extension, when something breaks out of that two-dimensional rectangle. For billboards, those extensions are almost always to the top and to one side. They're seldom to the bottom because that's where your scaffolding is, and they don't tend to work as well. Okay, here's another example of the special effect, and this is an extension, but a kind of a specialized form of an extension that's called an extrusion. Extrusion is three-dimensional content, so that's coming out in front of the billboard instead of just breaking out of the two-dimensional rectangle. So a lot of people still call this an extension, but technically it's an extrusion. Okay, other special effects would be the sequence. Okay, so this is an image from the recent film Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, and it shows a very simple form of the sequence kind of billboard where you see the first message, raped while dying, and then the second, and still no arrests, and then how come Chief Willoughby. The sequence billboard is essentially the same idea as what you get with a lot of animated internet advertising, where the message plays out over a period of frames. In this case, with a sequence billboard ad, the message plays out kind of over a period of distance. Okay, one of the most famous advertising campaigns in U.S. history was a sequence billboard campaign or small sign campaign for Burma Shave. These started, I think, back in the 1940s, and here's an example of one of them. And each one of these panels would be a separate sign. So the first one you would drive up, you would see this little red sign by the side of the road. It would say "Her Chariot," and then a couple seconds later, you'd see the raced 80 per. They hauled away what had been her, reference to the allusion to the famous movie of the time, and then always ended with the Burma Shave logo. They got fairly scientific about that. They would distance the panels, the subsequent panels on each one, based on the speed limit in that particular area, so they would know exactly how many feet to put between each sign. Okay. There's another one: a man, a miss, a car, a curve. He kissed the miss and missed the curve. Burma Shave. A lot of times they had, like these first two messages, they had kind of a public safety about safe driving that was kind of put into the silly little poem. Here's another one: the wolf is shaved so neat and trim. Red Riding Hood is chasing him. And here's one more that's not a Burma Shave, but this is a safe driving ad out of New Zealand. And so you see the first panel is of the little boy when he's a toddler, and then he's getting older and older and older. And then the message comes in the last two panels, and it says, "Don't let your life flash before you, and slow down." Okay, other kind of special effects. There are screen rotations. You see these a lot on freeways around Southern California. These are generally now digital billboards. They used to be mechanical, but digital billboards where just a new ad comes up every 6 to 8 seconds, and they may have 4 or 5 in the rotation there, and before they would start to repeat. And it's based on how many you're likely to be exposed to when that billboard would be in view when you're on the freeway. Spectaculars is the traditional term for big lighted displays of billboards. And so here's an example of Times Square in New York City. If you've never been you got to go sometime. It is so much fun and so just electric to see Times Square at night and all the spectacular lighted billboards. Many of those are now video, but they've always been very flashy and very fun and just really in your face. I think it'd be really cool now to be able to be a photographer in New York City, be able to go into Times Square at night now and see what this all looks like without people. Spectaculars have been around though for quite a while. So that Times Square one, that was a fairly recent image. Here's one from the boardwalk in Atlantic City, New Jersey, from 1929. And so this is an ad for General Electric, and it's basically just their logo at the end of the pier, but you can see the bank of floodlights below it there. So this was taken during the daytime, and then this is what it would look like at night. So if you were walking along in the 1920s and saw this, that would be a pretty spectacular image to see and would be quite memorable, I would think. Video billboards. We're starting to see more of those. There have been some playing in Los Angeles this spring. I think we'll probably start to see more of those as time goes on, but the video billboards are what they sound like. There's a video playing or animation going. Certainly there are some possible issues about them being distracting to drivers, but if the cities and are going to allow them, I think you'll see a lot of advertisers who would want to use them. Another kind of special effect is called the building wrap billboard, and that's what a building wrap looks like. It usually goes around two sides, or at least turns the corner. In this case, this one for NBC, people can upload their pictures, and so this is a digital billboard on a building wrap where these images can change and people can see themselves on the billboard. Another example of a building wrap. This is for Heineken. You can see the hand coming out, so this is a building wrap with an extrusion that works pretty well. Aerial advertising as a subcategory of out of home. We've all seen the planes flying along the beach areas in Southern California with messages on them. That's a traditional kind of aerial advertising, but you also have things like balloon advertising. Here, the more traditional plane carrying a banner. The blimp advertising is another form of aerial outdoor advertising. So from a creative standpoint, the most important thing to remember is that consumers are likely only going to see your billboard for a couple of seconds. The second thing to remember is, based on the reach and frequency data that we know, they may only see it for a couple of seconds, but they're going to see it today, tomorrow, the next day. They're going to see this over and over and over again. So you need to come up with something that the message can work very quickly, and yet something that's going to be interesting enough, entertaining enough that people won't mind seeing it on a repetitive basis. All right, so in terms of copy, be succinct. The rule of thumb is about 7 words per billboard. Now, if you count the logo as maybe one of those words, maybe you're using a theme line that might be another 3 or 4, you can get down to where you've only got a couple of words that you have to be able to write a headline. So you need to be able to write billboards in really just 2 to 3 words is perfect, but try to keep your total number of words in the billboard to around 7. And so that's why you really do have to be succinct. You may not be able to use a theme line on all billboards, or sometimes the billboard is just an image and the theme line instead of an additional headline. In terms of type, billboards are not the place to get too cute because you don't want to use decorative typefaces. You generally just want to go for legibility. Now, that's generally true with any kind of integrated campaign that you're going to use a legible typeface for your display type. So in the cases for your integrated campaign, you will pick up whatever your display typeface that you're using for headlines in other media, and that will probably be the typeface that you should use for your billboards. Typically, you'll use one single dominant piece of art and crop in close, make it big, crop in close, rather than using multiple pieces of art in the same billboard. Complementary color schemes tend to work better. They're higher contrast, they're higher noticeability than subtle, analogous or harmonious color schemes. So you typically will use bright colors, primary colors, and contrast them. Make sure your logo or the branding or the packaging is big enough that it can be recognized on just a fleeting glimpse, can be recognized from a distance. Make one point. That's true of most advertising, but it's especially true if you only have 7 words to work with. So, keep it simple, keep it clear, keep it fun. See if you can come up with visual concepts. They tend to work very well, but also keep in mind that you need to keep your visuals fairly simple. So those two ideas will sometimes kind of work in conflict. For multimedia campaigns, which is what you'll be doing for your integrated, sometimes the function of the billboard is simply as support advertising, and so you see a related image that you would recognize as being part of the campaign, and then you will use whatever theme line and the logo, and then that may be it. That may be all there is to that particular billboard ad. Okay, transit advertising, another subtype. That's where you're placing ads on or inside mass transit vehicles. There are a lot of different examples. Kind of our typical default idea of what a transit ad looks like is just a small sign like on a taxi cab or a bus, and oftentimes those are kind of like mobile business cards. So a lot of the transit advertising kind of has a reputation for being fairly dull and boring. Doesn't need to be. So here's bus advertisement for Axe with a wrap on the bus, and kind of fun. Right? For careerbuilder.com, maybe nobody ever thought about putting the ad on top of the bus before. Here's another one for those shuttle buses that if you've bought an airline ticket on one of those airlines that doesn't pay the airport enough to have an actual gate, and this is what you get. So you put an ad on those luggage holders. This one I think is fairly clever. It's for United Airlines, and it's promoting Newark, which is one of their hubs, Newark, New Jersey. And so what they have are electronic displays on taxi cabs that are linked to GPS. And so wherever that taxi cab is in New York City, it can show you the amount of time that it would take you to get to JFK versus the amount of time that it would take you to get to the Newark airport where United has their hub. So it's time to fly United out of Newark. The only downside to that is you have to go to Newark. There's a traditional outdoor ad, just for fun. Now I'm going to show you a few international billboards and signs, just also kind of for fun, but these are some shots that I've taken on different travels. This is a Kia ad from Dubai. One of the things I always thought was interesting about the advertising in Dubai is that there was everything seemed to have a very luxurious feel to it. So even Kia looking like a luxury car there. Here's another one from Dubai for a more luxurious product. Here's an ad for McDonald's. This was also around Dubai, and this is a good example of things that you will see in other countries where you will often see just really unusual shapes and sizes for billboard ads. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that it's just not as standardized and may not be as regulated. And so sometimes there are opportunities to do, like a super horizontal like this particular ad. Or this one, which was a whole building ad for United Arab Bank. And when I first saw this, I thought that was a projection. But as I got close enough to get a picture of it, I really believed this was a wrap, kind of like a cellophane wrap that was translucent, so the people inside those windows could still see out. But this is kind of like a whole wrap going up the entire length of the building there. Here's one from Doha, Qatar, where I used to live, and this is an example of what's called a scaffolding advertising. I don't know that I've ever seen one of these in the U.S., but I've seen several of these in the Middle East, and It's called a scaffolding because there's a whole bunch of scaffolding behind it that holds the thing up. You can see how large it is in relation to the semi truck there. So these scaffolding are usually located on corners of really busy intersections. You can see there's another one there to the far left, and they're customizable, so they can be kind of rebuilt and reshaped to whatever the concept is. And this is an ad for Vodafone, which is one of the bigger cell phone networks in the Middle East. These two signs are examples of another format of international billboard. You don't see these in the US very often. The closest thing that I kind of see in the US to this would be some of the small billboards that are in shopping malls, that are in pedestrian areas. But these would be located on busy highways, but placed in the median. And they're a small billboard. They don't take up a lot of the view of the cityscape, but they're still noticeable. And they're vertical, which is also a little unusual for billboards. In places like Qatar, what you would see is, so this one for KFC, you would see the Arabic version, and then a little bit farther down the road, you would see the same ad, but in an English version. Here's some signage that I saw in Irbid, Jordan. Irbid is a city in the northern part of Jordan near Syria. Obviously, a little bit of trademark infringement there, but you see a lot of that in many developing countries as well. And one for In-N-Out. And it's not just burgers, it's burgers, hot dogs, and more. So who knew that in the Middle East that hot dogs are on the In-N-Out secret menu? This is in Myanmar, Kubota. Very proud of the number of different bulldozers and things they have for sale. Another one from Myanmar. Here's another set from Irbid, Jordan. And so this is an example of another pedestrian-sized billboard. These are horizontal. You don't see very many of these in the U.S., but you will see some, particularly in the northeast part of the country, in some of the major metropolitan areas. And these would typically be located in parts of the city that would have high pedestrian traffic. This Oreo ad on the left is kind of funny because when you first look at it, you try to figure it out and it doesn't make any sense. But if you remember that Arabic is a right to left reading language, then it does. So it's Oreo plus milk equals happy. City center advertising is another type of kind of like spectacular. So here's Hollywood and Vine. Here's another one of Times Square in New York. Like I said, you got to get there if you ever have the chance. And then here is Piccadilly Circus in London. So that's the British counterpart to Times Square, but obviously since it's British, it's a little bit more staid and understated. Okay, I want to show you a few examples of what I think are fairly creative billboard kinds of ideas in which you're kind of working the creative concept into the special effect or into the technique. So here's one, an ad council one, stop the text, stop the Rex, and the airbag has text to deploy. So the concept is kind of all wrapped up in the visual there. Another one for McDonald's on the Big Mac, and that works really well. That they took up 2 billboards, but it doesn't need a headline or anything to say anything about the size. The concept works there with the extrusion and the 2 billboards. Chick-fil-A has probably done outdoor advertising as well as probably any brand in the U.S. For a long, long time. This campaign was created by the Richards Group out of Dallas, and it's really run long. It's a campaign with legs. People just seem to like the poor spelling from the little cows and the 3-dimensional cow statues that are always placed on there tend to work very well. So there's another one. That first one didn't even have any Chick-fil-A branding on it, and you recognized it right away that it was a Chick-fil-A ad, right? See no, hear no, eat no. food friend. And we see you, burger eaters. There's another good example of using the special effect to help illustrate the concept of the strong teeth. And another one here of the folding to kind of illustrate the concept that tailgating isn't worth it. Here's one for Lego where the billboard at first looks like it's a window through the rest of the street scene, but it's actually Legos that have recreated the street scene that's right behind the billboard sign. And then interactive billboards. You don't see these real often, but when they do, you can see why they're kind of appealing and why brands would like to try them once in a while, because it's the idea if you can get people to stop and actually touch your billboard or interact with it in some way, it's something that they're probably much more likely to remember, but also post on social media and things like that. And so you can get a little bit of extra run on billboard ads like that. All right, that's it for today's lecture. On Thursday, we'll meet with a short Zoom session to go over the lab on producing a mock-up for a billboard. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the integrated campaign on Thursday. So see you soon.